And sorry, we just last minute had, he was asking to join you up here for the Q&A. So we're here for Gremlins 2. So tell us, you finished the first film, or it was, I'd say finished, but it then ended premiering in 1984. This movie comes out in 1990. When did you know you were going to make a sequel?
Well, the first movie was wildly successful, to the surprise of everyone, including me, in the studio, which didn't understand it at all. I was very happy to count the money. And then they said, well, we need another one right away. And I said, well, I just spent a lot of time with these puppets. I don't think I can do that. I'm sorry, I'm puppeted out. And so they said, fine. And they tried to figure out a way to make a sequel to a movie they didn't understand to begin with. And they spent some money. They hired some writers and came up with some concepts. Gremlins go to Mars, Gremlins go to Las Vegas. But they didn't really get what had made the movie special. And so finally, after a lot of false starts, they came back to me and they said, well, we really want this for next summer, and if you'll do a sequel for us, we'll let you do whatever you want.
That's a deal.
And that's not a deal that I've ever heard since. And I have to be honest, they were true to their word, even though they were even more perplexed by the sequel than they were by the original. But I figured, look, what I should do is I should make a sequel about why there shouldn't be a sequel to Gremlins. So,
what a pitch!
We basically made fun of the first movie. We made fun of the rules. We made fun of all the tropes that had actually made the movie successful. And but that's not because we didn't like the movie. It's just that it was ripe for that kind of Mad Magazine satire. And this is sort of a Mad Magazine version of the first movie, even though Mad Magazine did a very good parody of the first movie in their magazine. And so there was more money. There was 3 times as much money as we had to make the first picture, which was great, which meant that we could do more stuff with the puppets and with Gizmo, who couldn't walk in the first movie. We had to have him carried around because we just didn't have the technology to make it work. And so Rick Baker, Chris Wallace, who had done the original Gremlins, had decided he wanted to be a director, so he didn't want to do the Gremlins again. So I went to Rick Baker, who was a friend of mine, and I worked with on The Howling before John Landis stole it away. And I said, would you like to do this? And he said, well, what's in it for me? I'm not going to be able to, I don't want to just imitate what Chris did. And I said, well, let's come up with some new Gremlins. So Charlie Haas, the writer, who also wrote Matinee for me,
Amazing movie.
we decided to come up with a character played by Christopher Lee, who was a genetic scientist. And he's creating a whole bunch of new Gremlins. And this intrigued Rick Baker. I can do different stuff. And so a whole lot of the stuff that's in the movie is based on the idea that Rick wanted to do new kinds of Gremlins. And they are indeed bizarre. And in fact, some of the most bizarre Gremlins didn't even make it to the screen. There was an elephant Gremlin. I mean, there was a lot of weird stuff that didn't get into that movie. And I just, out of curiosity, how many people have seen this movie before? And how many people have seen the first movie?
Yeah.
How many people have seen this movie but haven't seen the first movie? Wow. That's amazing.
But then can you ask how many people have not seen the number 2? Who has not seen the second movie?
Well, you don't have to have seen the first movie to get this movie, although there's a lot of jokes about the first movie in this movie. And it is essentially a big joke. And, it's my id on screen. It's a Frank Tashlin kind of Mad Magazine kind of version of what I would have done to the first movie if I hadn't been, stuck with the project that I was given. And so this was like, okay, I'm just going to let my imagination run wild. And we made this movie, which was a very unusual sequel for a studio movie. managed to, I wouldn't say upset the studio, but they were just wondering, what the hell is he done now with our money? And it was supposed to be released at a certain time, and they decided to delay the release because they were afraid that Dick Tracy, which was coming out that summer, was going to make more money than Batman, which was their big record breaker. So they said, well, let's not run the Gremlins movie. Let's hold it for a couple of months and put it up against Dick Tracy so that they can't beat Batman, which was unfortunate because they were running ads in May for this movie on TV, and then it didn't come out. And so by the time in June or July, when they actually started running the ads again, people said, didn't this movie already play? Didn't I miss it? So it didn't make as much money as they would have liked to have it, or any of us would have. But it did, in the miracle of home video, become quite popular.
Yes.
And the thing about home video for all of us who made movies in the 80s was that even movies that didn't hit in the theaters found an audience on video, particularly because people could hand the videos to their friends and their families, and they could rewatch them. And a lot of movies that were not successful in theaters were very, very popular on video, to the point where people now look back and say, oh, that must have been a big hit when it was new. No, it was not theatrically. But the miracle of home video has actually changed, it changed the entire course of the movies that were made in Hollywood from then on.
Thank you for that, because just listening to that story, it's not really lost on me, the irony that you've made it like a satire on a media corporation, and then a studio doesn't know how to release a movie. But then let's thinking about kind of the first film. I mean, you must have learned, I'm sure, quite a bit from the first Gremlins going into the second. What are some of the learnings that you took?
Well, we
into
learned
Gremlins
what
2?
didn't work, which was almost everything.
So what did you do differently?
Well, it's a puppet movie, and we tried a whole lot of things in the first movie that didn't work, and we realized that we had a very limited amount of ability to make them look real. Although we did a pretty good job. But then when it came to the second movie, we could have Gizmo not have to be carried around in a backpack. He could now walk around. He could talk. We had a Gremlin who talks in the voice of Tony Randall.
Amazing. We love brain.
And it's a more sophisticated movie, I think, and it's no less silly than the first movie.
Correct.
But it does have a certain early '90s kind of quality, to the point where when Steven Spielberg saw it, he said, "Oh my God, is this what the '90s are going to be like?" It wasn't that
Oh my goodness. Okay, so everything feels like clearly expanded. You then, kind of take us out of the small town setting in Gremlins 1. Now we're in New York City. You filmed in New York City, correct, for this film?
Yeah, we didn't. The thing about sequels is what studios really want with sequels is they want the same movie again, slightly different, but they don't want to make anything different because the audience will go, well, it's not the same movie. And that's not the way it works. The way you make a great sequel is to build on what was in the first movie and then change it. So what we did is we took it out of the small town, we put it in the big city, we took our hero and heroine and moved them from the small town into the big city so that they had to deal with all the stuff that goes on in the big city. And also, they're now working for a developer who is modeled on a certain person who shouldn't be president. But in a much more benign way than we ever imagined. And also based on Ted Turner, because Ted Turner had what's the word? A cable company.
Yes.
So he's a kind of combination of both. But when we hired John Glover to play this character, John, who was written as your basic kind of, villain, corporate villain, John played him like a big kid. And he was just so excited about everything. He was happy to be anywhere. He was so happy to have money. He was happy to do anything. And he's so endearing in the movie that in the end, I was embarrassed that we had made this character as is sympathetic. As he is in the movie, because in real life, he's not sympathetic at all, as we're discovering.
But then you also then talk, I mean, the production design of this film, even just like, it's incredible. It's like magnificent. Every scene. I'm just so curious, what was maybe one of your favorite sets?
Well, we built this giant set in Warner Brothers' biggest stage, which was a giant wall. And it took up the entire stage with several floors. Interestingly, there was a U-Haul on the third floor. And it was so popular that other filmmakers came to look at this set. And Paul Mazursky wanted to take it and rebuild it in New York for scenes from a mall. But they realized, of course, it would be too expensive to do that. And it was such a fun set to work on. You know, also all the sets that we do Gremlins on have to be multi-layered because the people who operate the Gremlins have to be underground, you know, with monitors and they, you know, have the levers and all that kind of stuff. And so it was extremely complicated, but it's a cool set. I mean, it's like
Beautiful
you
set.
could live in it.
And so was there like then maybe a favorite scene? There's so many good sets in this movie. Is there a favorite of yours, or you're not allowed to have one?
I don't know. It's just such a weird movie. It's so personal to me because I'm a weird person. And I also wouldn't be doing this, as you'll find out from most directors, by the way. Because they're all people who were playing cowboys and Indians when they were kids, and now they get to do it for real life. And in this movie, they just said, go ahead and do whatever you want, and then we'll have to deal with it later. And it was a joy to go to work, and also the cast. It's a wonderful cast. A lot of my regulars, a lot of people who work for me a lot. And Zach and Phoebe, of course, you know, came back, and Phoebe Cates is just, you know, a goddess. And there's a lot of great, and of course Christopher Lee was like, you know, I'd always been a big fan.
Come on, guys, give it up for Christopher Lee. Can you talk about casting?
I've always been a big fan, and he came in for this part of the Dr. Catheter, who was the genetic scientist, and he had his he had a beard, and he looked kind of cuddly. And I said, hey, you better come to the set. And I took him to the set, and I saw how cold and forbidding it was. And I said, you gotta shave the beard. I want forbidding Christopher Lee. I want the part that you always play. And he got it right away. And he was so much fun, and he was amazed at how much love there was for him among the crew. Because, you know, he's an actor from Europe, and he hasn't been in America for that long, and he's done some American movies, but I think he was kind of unaware until this movie how popular he really was with people who make movies. And it was just, you know, everything about the movie was just so much fun. And Rick Baker did an amazing job. I mean, these creatures are believable, and Gizmo, who was the hardest creature to do because he's so small and has to have all these emotions, is, I think, even more believable in this movie than he was in the first movie, which makes sense because we had more money. But and I'm not even going to get into his drinking problem or any of that stuff. The difficulty was on the set. That's the stuff of legend.
Someone had asked me in the audience, my friend Kevin, want to give him a shout out if Gizmo, like what he earned on the second movie.
Well, he was trying to hold out for a lot of money because, you know, he said, look, I was the star of the first movie. You know, let's face it, if you had designed me to be the same color as Spielberg's dog, I wouldn't even have been in the movie. So that's, you know, I think I deserve more. And so we thought, well, you know, Bitcoin hasn't been invented yet. We could pay him in that. So instead, we paid him in Monopoly money.
Thank you. I don't want to give away too much before we get into the movie shortly, but there are some pretty amazing cameos as well. And I'm just really curious, can you tell a story about getting Leonard Maltin and maybe this lovely scene that we get to see?
Well, Leonard is a friend of mine, has been for years. I knew him on the East Coast. and he was working for Entertainment Tonight at the time, and he really didn't like the first Gremlins movie. He gave it like 2 stars in his book. And yet when I went to visit him at his house, he had Gremlins cereal. So, but I said, because I was looking for ways to make fun of the first movie, and I said, Leonard, why don't you be in this movie, and you can do your review of Gremlins. You can give it a bad review like you did, and then we'll have the Gremlins kill you.
Spoiler, sorry.
And he said, okay. And that's what we did.
There's so many, like to your point, it's chaotic, but it actually all works, and there's such a wonderful joy in that, in all of that. I've got to ask about how, you'll see in the beginning and then also at the end, how you got to, the Chuck Jones Looney Tunes as a part of this.
Well, I had met Chuck Jones at Telluride, and we got along really great. And so he's in the first Gremlins movie as he's a bomber, and he's a bit of Zach Galifian's character that kind of got lost was that he was a cartoonist, and he was doing some cartoons, and Chuck was helping him out with it. And Chuck was the closest I've ever met to anybody who was like Mark Twain. And Chuck, so when it came time to do this sequel, I said, one of the things that would be really interesting in this movie is if it didn't start out like a regular movie, it started out like it was going to be a Warner Brothers cartoon. And so I went to Chuck and asked him if he wanted to do the opening titles for this picture, and he, to my everlasting joy, he said sure. And so the beginning and end of this movie are by Chuck Jones, not me.
It's so special. It's really beautiful. I think this also speaks to you, Joe, about how you work with people that you love, who you admire. You bring back actors that you work with them often people on your set, and it just really, I think, shows your generosity as a maker in so many ways. I have to ask, what is your favorite Gremlin from this movie?
Well, the usual answer is, most people's answer is the girl Gremlin, who has now been called Greta by the marketing department.
I think there are a couple T-shirts of Greta.
We never had a name for her, but the marketing department decided to call her Greta, and that's what's come down. And she works with Bob Picardo, who is very funny in this movie and has the last word in it. But I've always been a fan of this Gremlin. Not because I'm approve of flashers. There's just always been something about that scene in the first movie that was so unexpected and funny. The idea of flashing somebody when you haven't got anything to flash always struck me as funny. So, but I must confess a certain fondness for the Bat Gremlin. It's a lot of good Gremlins. There's a vegetable Gremlin. There's a vegetable Gremlin.
There's so many.
Uvinas.
I'll wrap it up with this last question. You were talking at the beginning about Mad Magazine, and there have clearly just been parodies. I've got to mention the Key and Peele sketch. I'm sure you've seen.
Absolutely, and true every word.
And the reason for bringing that up is just and seeing an audience again. You're just talking about how the film just really. I don't know, it really touches people, it gets people excited about going to movies, seeing movies together, it's so self-referential, and I'm just wondering, what is it to you that you think that why people love this movie? Sometimes they love this movie actually better than the first, so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that?
Some do and some don't, but I think that the thing about any movie, particularly a movie like this one, to see it with an audience like this, is to see it, as opposed to watching it on video with your girlfriend or 3 people or whatever. That's fine. But there's something about seeing a movie with an audience, and the reason Vidiots exists is that it's a special thing. You become part of the movie. The movie is not the same if it's seen without an audience. Any movie, I'm talking about every movie. And Vidiots does, they have a great adjunct where you can rent these things, take them home. That's terrific because we need that. But the one thing we really need is camaraderie, and we need people to see movies together in a group, and to feed off each other, and to feed off the joy and the horror and the fear and the laughter and that you get by seeing a movie with an audience. It's a communal experience. And that's why we all love movies. We didn't fall in love with movies by watching them on TV. We fall in love with movies by seeing them in the theater. And this is a great example of why people should go to the movies.
This is where we brought them up. That was beautiful. One more round of applause for we're bringing you back. I know we love watching movies with Joe. One more round of applause.